So, welcome back to Study Chess with me. And in this particular session, even though I had actually been planning to do Ludek Pachman, I will forestall that for just one more day. I wanted to get in a quick tactics session, and I'm going to take advantage and do it here with you. I will also take advantage to share with you a game excerpt from a correspondence game that I played recently. Correspondence chess for me today really doesn't have any particular interest because, in its, let's say, natural form, what has sort of I hate to call it evolved. I tend to call it devolved. It used to be that this would be all about a player sitting down, thinking a long time about the moves, analyzing, showing off what he was capable of, or she, against a similar opponent somewhere else. You could play it by email. You could be played uh, by letter. It doesn't really matter. And nowadays, it's basically this giant matchup between computers. And the International Correspondence Chess Federation has not forbidden it, and simply because there's really no way to prevent it. In any case, my particular game is based on an honor system because, of course, there's no other way to do this. Against a guy who I know online, he's rated over 2,000 correspondence chess on chess.com, and we've played a number of games. This last game that we played ended up in a very strong tactical slugfest in which I was ready, although I didn't really get the opportunity to, sacrifice an entire rook to go forward for the attack. It ended up in a nice little um, mate, and I'm going to share it with you. And I hope you appreciate it. This is basically, for me, in any case, this is not about showing off my skills, which are really nothing to brag about yet. Maybe someday they will. But more to show that the tactical work that I've been doing, I feel, has been very beneficial and is actually the key to why I was able to pull off what I did. Um, you'll also notice I'm going to be returning to chess.com in this particular session that my rating in chess.com has gone up considerably. The tactical rating, that is. I last left off, although obviously it's been a while. I think it's been like 2 weeks or something. When I last did chess.com, I think my rating was 3350 or something, and now it's closing in on 3500. Okay, so black to move, and as you can see, that's my current tactical rating. I am shooting for 3500, needless to say. Hopefully, we'll achieve it in this session, but we'll see. And yeah, time to study and analyze. Let's see what we have here. Okay. There's a bunch of moves, obviously. You can take the pawn. You can try to run with the king to c5, which looks catastrophic. And of course, you have king c7, which is actually my move. The lines that I have to analyze, obviously, are e6 after king here, e6, or knight e6 check. So I don't know how much I'm going to be tested on this, and even if I'm right. But what I saw is after king c7, knight e6 check, king c8, um, queen g8, obviously not queen f8 because there's a bishop here, king b7, and yeah, then basically you have to figure out what you're going to do for an encore here. The knight can play, let's say, d8 check, and if knight d8 check, then king c7 right back. Because now if he comes up with a check, I'll just take it because I'm no longer pinned. Black is up a piece, so obviously the idea here is to keep that piece. The other line that I saw is, of course, king c7 e6, in which case I have queen d8 check. Sorry, queen e1 check, king f3, queen c3 check. Obviously not king g4 because of h5 mate. So king f4, and then it's bishop d6 with mate. And that should be good enough. We'll find out if I'm right. Okay, so he plays that line. Fair enough. Solid. Well, maybe we'll crack 3 at 3,500 today. That would be something. It's not that the ratings per se mean anything, but they serve as milestones as to where you are at and where you are at now. So it helps at least measure how much you're moving forward or not moving forward. So good, solid, solid. All right, so black to move. Okay, I think I found the solution. It's I was distracted by a sideline or a side possibility, but I couldn't make it to work. And I think it's a little bit different. So I'll tell you what the sideline was when I give you my solution. The move I believe is bishop takes g3, pawn takes g3. There is no switch and sug with rook takes f6 because the queen is hanging. So pawn takes. And here the sideline that I kept trying to make work, but I couldn't, was rook f1 check, king f1, queen h3, and I thought this would get it there faster. But then I can't seem to close the deal because queen h3 check, king g1, queen h2 check, king f1, queen e2 check, and queen e3 doesn't work because every time I'm about to close mate, let's say queen e2 check, king g1, queen e3 check, king f1, queen e4, then he actually has rook c2 because both of his rooks are here, and that's enough to block me. I tried spinning variations and I couldn't make it work, so eventually I kept coming back to it, unfortunately. The inefficiencies of uh, learner calculators is bishop takes g3, pawn takes g3, queen h3 directly, and yes, rook takes f6 now. I can't imagine there's any other move involved. Queen h2 check, king f1, and now pawn takes e4. Now, of course, I'm threatening, among other things, queen g2 and queen h1 mate. Both of these are mates. So he's going to have to, unless he decides to give up his queen with, let's say, rook c2 and then rook takes c2, because now he only has his queen here. So, for example, if rook f2, then queen h1 mate, and if bishop f2, queen h1, bishop g1, queen e2, king e1, queen e2 mate. And of course, there is a Zwischenzug that has to be considered, which is after bishop takes g3, pawn takes g3, queen h3, rook f6, queen h2, uh, king f1, pawn takes e4. What if he decides to try to perpetual me? Let's say with rook takes f7 to bring in his queen and see if he can't, harass me to death. So if rook takes f7, the plan is not to take the rook immediately, but rather to play king h6. Now, there's only one check available if he decides to go that route, but it's going to make a mate much faster unless he gives up his queen. So, for example, rook f7, sure, I'm forced to take. Rook h7, king takes h7, queen d7, king h6, and there's no checks left for the queen or any other piece. So, looks good enough. We'll see. Maybe I'll find out there's something really wrong with all of this, but we'll find out. I hate these computers. Oh, Lord. Okay, well, my line obviously worked. I mean, obviously, I have to assume it worked. I didn't predict the defense of bishop g2, so I spent some time calculating. And I believe the continuation here, and I'm hoping I'm right, um, is rook b takes f2, bishop takes f2. The bishop is still, this rook is still pinned, of course. Uh, rook takes f2, bishop takes f2, bishop takes f2 check. And if, let's say, king g2, h2, apologies, my plan is simply queen h4 with simple mating ideas, nothing fancy. If he plays instead king f1, then bishop takes e3 check. I think it's good enough. King e2, of course. Bishop takes c1. The rook cannot be captured back because, again, we still have that little problem here. And to make things more decisive, this rook is now pinned quite dangerously. So, looks good enough. Fingers crossed. And I am incorrect. Okay. Wow. Puzzle rating 3675. Didn't take away any of my rating though. I wonder if it's because it's supposedly so difficult. Well, it is difficult, but still. So, let's find out what I got wrong. Okay, so oh, it was bishop. Really? I considered that, but I didn't see how. Why was okay? It doesn't matter. Ay, ay, ay. Wang Yui and Laurent Fressinet. Dang. Well, I don't know about the 3600 part, but these guys are rated, both of them, at least in their peak. I don't know when this excerpt is from, were over 2700. So I wonder if they actually saw this. Well, it'll be good to look it up, but doesn't matter. So bishop takes e4, bishop takes g3, bishop g2. Let's just quickly see if the other line, because I am curious. Okay, so what would happen if I played this? I want to at least know if the line that I had calculated was correct. So I had said queen h3, okay, and rook takes f6, absolutely, and queen h2, sure, king f1, um, pawn takes e4, rook takes f7. I mean, that was the line I calculated. It says rook c2, but it doesn't matter. We know that rook takes c2 is just losing everything. So rook takes f7, king h6. Okay, so at least that line was correct. It wasn't all spent in futility. So let's see. Okay, so first, let's see what happens if I had played my rook b takes f2. What was wrong with it? Oh, he has one defense. Wow. So rook takes f6, of course, is just losing. Um, queen b3, no good. He has queen d1. Didn't see that at all. Queen d1. Wow. And queen d1 is enough to hold the fort. So queen d1, let's just play it out. It's fine. Queen d1, rook takes c6. Sure. Bishop takes f2. Bishop takes f2. King takes f2. And he says rook f6 check. And there's a bunch of lines here that are apparently equal. Okay. Yeah, I'm not going to go through all these lines and sit there trying to calculate every possibility. It's not my game, and that's not the purpose here. But interesting. Okay. And I am dinged for 7 points. C'est la vie. Next. Black to move. Okay, so still smarting from my previous fail. Not a big deal. Um, my move here is knight takes f2. Obviously, king takes f2, queen takes g3 is going to be mate. So queen takes f3, rook takes g3, king uh, king h1, because of course king f1, rook f6, and not rook g2 immediately. It's tempting, but it fails as far as I can tell. If you play rook g2 immediately, then you're going to run into either queen check, king moves, and then queen f4, covering this diagonal, and therefore your uh, ambitions are stymied. So rook takes g3, king h1, rook f8, and the queen doesn't really have anywhere to go except away. And now rook g2 should be quite powerful. So that's my move. Okay. And we got that one correct. There's a little bit of a lag on my end here. I have to restart this connection. Okay. And my connection had indeed fallen. So good thing I recovered it and got my 5 points. Okay. Okay. So let's do one more. White to move. Okay, so my solution is queen takes g7, queen takes b2, rook c1, and the queen is actually protecting this knight. So bishop b4, knight e2, knight g2, of course. And yeah, you can cover it up, let's say, with f6, but I can still play bishop d2. And the fact is that your rook is permanently hanging, so none of this is helping you. That should be good enough. Okay, I'll take it. Yes. There's an expression in Portuguese, uh, água mole em pedra dura, bate bate até que fura. And it's an appropriate one. It basically means I've got a little pop up saying I broke 3500. I don't know if it appears because the software here is rigged to only show one screen. Um, but basically, it means um, water banging on rock constantly and nonstop, and eventually it will break through. Meaning, even the softest water will eventually pierce through rock. And it's an expression that's designed to talk about persistence. So, okay. Well, I'm going to leave my session on a high note. So, this is a correspondence game that I just finished a couple of days ago. And it's against a friend who I met online, who is not a chess player per se. I mean, I didn't meet him through chess, let's put it that way. But apparently he has a rating of over 2,000 on chess.com in correspondence chess, which is where we're playing. So I can vouch for that being accurate. I have no idea what that represents in terms of over the board strength or anything else. The conditions of our game are that nobody is using books, databases, opening trees, or engines. This is raw, me against you. We think our moves on the board. We take our time. We study. We look at the position, come up with our moves, and send it on. The moves have been going fairly fast. Mostly, if it's a recapture, it'll go, pretty much the same day. And if it's a, let's just say, opening moves that we are just starting up, then we'll rattle them out. And yes, by that tone, you can obviously guess that we've actually played a few games. I've actually won them all. But it is what it is. I'm white, and we reached this position, I played g4. My opponent played bishop a6. I played the fairly obvious move here, g5. It's obvious I switched in because, of course, after bishop takes f1, then pawn takes f6. Should be pretty self-evident. The computer I later looked had a variety of little, say, move orders for this, but it amounts to the same thing. I mean, the idea is, yes, you can play g5, and he can't do anything immediately about it. So knight d7 was played. Knight d5 with the very obvious threat now of knight takes e7 here. And of course, winning the queen. So he plays bishop f8, not a very surprising move. And here is where the game gets interesting. I looked at this position. I could obviously see that he's attacking my rook with bishop on f1. So theoretically, I should be considering either rook e1 or bishop e2. But I had a moment of inspiration. And I spent a lot of time, which really means like 10, maybe even 15 minutes, studying this position on the screen. And I ended up playing queen h4. After the game, now I didn't know at the time what the computer was going to think, and it could have dinged me for it. But like I said, I mean, the whole point is to try to play your own stuff here and not have that engine crutch while you're playing, because you won't have that in a real game. So I showed this to a friend after, because the computer actually completely agreed with this and said, yes, absolutely, queen h4. No argument. The best move. I was really proud because I thought, darn, good job. And I showed this to a friend who is a former 2800 player. I will say that just because I don't want to give away his name, be polite and not. And he said, trust me, your position is even better than it looks. And I thought, okay. So my idea and main line, because obviously I didn't just play queen h4 and hope for the best. I did a lot of calculation here. And my main line went like this. And I wasn't sure this was sound because I was worried that there might be some move order or calculation that I had missed. As you've seen in the tactics before this game that I'm showing you, I can miss things. There could be some subtle defense or whatever. It's common, especially in very strong opponents or, let's say, complicated games. So yeah, anything can happen. And I wasn't sure here either. But my idea here boiled down to the following. And I was planning to give up the whole rook here. My main line goes like this. He could take here, obviously. That was the main thing you're calculating. So what my plan here was g6 immediately. Not taking the rook. I'm threatening mate. Okay. So let's suppose he plays h takes g6. Okay? Now, if h takes g6, I have to calculate both possibilities. F takes g6, f takes g6. Now, if f takes g6, we have bishop g4. Yep, you do not take that bishop. Not immediately. There's no need for it. And you have some serious problems here because you're looking at mates on all ends. Now, obviously, I'm immediately threatening bishop e6 mate. So this bishop here can't go anywhere because you have a little problem of bishop e6, checkmate. So the bishop here doesn't have the time to do anything. Yeah, you can play bishop h3, but that's not going to change anything. And then why bother? So rook e8. This is the obvious next move. And here we have two possibilities. The move that I calculated here, to be honest, this time I was planning on taking the exchange, giving back, just leaving the exchange with rook takes f1, and figuring out that I was going to be just crushing, which the engine agreed with. But nevertheless, because I mean, you can see that he can't, let's say, defend f7 anymore with possibilities of rook e7, whatever, because the minute he does that, I can just take. I mean, there's a knight and queen attacking that square twice. So my move here would be rook takes f1. Doesn't really matter much. Knight b6, for example. And why does it not matter much? Well, black is so tied down that really there's not a lot to suggest. Rook b8, rook knight b6, doesn't matter much. So queen g5, yeah, to emphasize just how tied down and hopeless this is. Knight takes, queen takes g6, and you are lost because of bishop f5 with the discovered checks and whatnot, and you just have nothing here. The queen can't come here because remember there's a rook here, and there's no checks, there's nothing, so game over. Okay, so that's one possibility. There is the other possibility, which is f takes g6. Okay, these are the lines that I actually calculated. Now, the computer may suggest a whole bunch of other possibilities, and that's perfectly fine. I'm showing you what I looked at, and which I was very proud the engine agreed with. Now, here it says f takes g6, h6, and this is the line that I calculated. Again, this is where I mentioned the whole rook part. Instead of taking on f1, which is completely doable, my line here is bishop takes h6. Now, you cannot save the bishop here with, let's say, I don't know, bishop c4, for example. Because the minute you do that, I'll play queen g5, bishop g5, and you cannot stop the mates on f7 or h7. So game over, right? Okay. There's really no exit here. You can see that all of the exit squares here are being covered. So pawn takes, forced, but the pawn is protected by that bishop on f8, and there's no rook takes or anything fancy like that. And then we continue with knight takes, knight e7 check. Obviously has to be taken, otherwise you're just losing your queen. Bishop takes, queen takes. Now I'm threatening mates all over the place. So bishop c4, which is the only move to protect f8, f7. Queen h7 check. King f8. And just to be clear, yes, rook f8 would be possible, but then it's queen h7 mate. So queen h7 check, king f8, g7, e8, bishop check, bishop here. And yeah, I could even promote and make queen or whatever. It's all the same. It's just game over. So queen g8, knight f8, mate. Cute. So this is the line. This is not actually what happened. I'm just showing you the lines that I calculated to justify queen h4. Okay. So far, nice. Interesting, some good stuff. My opponent did not collaborate. When do they ever? So we played g6. And I looked at this and I was like, I was okay with this. It wasn't the problem. It's just that I was so happy with my g6 sacrifice. I thought, yeah, I'm going to make a masterpiece. And instead, I'm looking at g6 and I said, you had to ruin it, you party pooper. So I began to calculate different options here. It wasn't actually the move that was high on my radar, to be honest with you. But solid. So I took on g6, and he played f takes g6. Now h takes g6 because I'll just point out really quickly. After f takes g6, bishop g4 with the threat of bishop e6 is really, really tough. You can see that there's some serious problems here. So if you wanted to prevent that, let's say by taking with h, covering the e6 square with the f pawn. Okay, so obviously now bishop g4 isn't going to work immediately because of this pawn. You have other problems. Now I'm threatening bishop takes d7, the knight, followed by knight f6 and mate. And you have some real problems. And of course, if you try to defend this knight f6 mate, which is fatal, with bishop g7, knight e7 picks up the queen. Game over either way. So f takes g6, bishop g4, of course, leaving the rook. In for a penny, in for a pound, but this is self-evident at this point. Queen b7, my opponent began to realize just how big trouble he was. Queen b7 does not help, but there's really no saving move, to be honest with you. The computer says you're lost. The only matter is how that loss is going to materialize. So bishop e6 check, king h8, obviously. Um, rook f7. And just to point out, if he had played king g7, rook f7 the same way, and king h8 wouldn't change a thing, except that it would be mate in two. Bishop g7, only way to prevent that mate. And here I came up with, I had two options here that I considered. The computer actually suggested a third, which I did not consider at all. Obviously, the computer was right. Simply, bishop takes d7 is possible. That's not the best move, but the computer suggests bishop d7 as the second best, with rook takes d7, knight f6 threatening mate on h7, h5, g takes h6, etc. Would I have found this? Yeah, I would have. But if I had been forced to play bishop takes d7 and there was no alternative, but I found better. So bishop g7, covering the mate on h7, otherwise it would be queen h7 mate. Knight e7, threatening mate with g6. And just to be really clear, the threat here immediately is knight takes g6 check, king g8, and rook f8 mate, with a double check of the rook and the bishop, and the knight is covering the rook on f8. So he played knight f8, covering the square on g6. And last final touch, rook takes f8, knight g6 check, mate. And needless to say, if instead he had played bishop takes f8, then it's still knight g6 check, king g7, queen h6 mate. So yeah, I was pretty damn happy about that. But I thought it was a nice, um, well conducted attack. They don't always go that way, trust me. So if I'm showing this, you're not going to see a bunch of masterpieces by Albert. Yeah, I wish. But still, I was pretty darn happy that I was able to figure out and calculate all of the relevant lines. And I believe that this is a direct consequence of all of that work I've been putting in on the tactics site and whatnot, which goes to basically reiterate my point for everybody out there who may be seeing this video at any stage. Regardless of your rating, and yeah, even if you're a master or a grandmaster, studying the tactics and working those positions, even after you are even really good or in need of learning everything, is always solid. It's basically like going to the gym and making sure your body's fit, even though you're a professional athlete who's working on his technique of tennis, golf, or what have you. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you will be here for the next study chess with me, where I promise you we'll be looking at Ludek Pachman and getting back on track with that positional play study, which I need a lot. I may be producing these nice little tactical skirmishes, but my positional play, yeah, I need a lot of work. So we'll be dealing with that very soon. Talk to you soon.